Welcome to the Fast Five by Fear and Greed. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael.
Today, in just 5 minutes, we're going to race through the world of commodities: gold, oil, iron ore, coal, and the rest of them, or, Sean, as many as we can fit in.
Yes, there's a fair bit to get through. It was certainly a big year for commodities in 2021, and some of the trends we saw will continue this year. Evan Lucas is the head of strategy at InvestSMART. Evan, thanks for joining us again on Fast Five.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
So, how much does commodities hinge on China? And that's a very general question.
That's a very general question, but it's probably the penultimate question from the point of view that absolutely. And then the next question after that is by how much, I think is probably what you're saying.
Right.
So China at the end of 2021 leading into this year was showing signs that it is getting slightly nervous itself about it slowing down, and therefore started to show stimulus was happening. This year we've got the Winter Olympics, and why the Winter Olympics matters is that, like we saw in Beijing back in 2008 when they held the Summer Olympics, they basically shut off all industry to make sure that the Olympics were as environmentally crystal clear to the rest of the world as possible. Post that, however, there are certainly signs that people suggest that they're going to really ramp up and try and catch up with what was a pretty tumultuous end of their year. So we're talking about the issues around Evergrande, the spreading risk into property, all that kind of stuff was a big wake-up call in Beijing. So to answer your question, because that's quite a long-winded thing, you will probably start to see the demand for things like met coal, iron ore, bulk commodities, copper, etc., start to really get quite interesting at around about sort of May, April period, when China traditionally normally shuts up shop, but that'll be just after the Winter Olympics, where there may actually be a little bit of a mini movement because they want to actually get back on and get back above 6% GDP sort of numbers.
Okay. What about the battery metal components, things like lithium, nickel, copper, the whole electrification trend? Great year 2021 for many of those commodities. What about 2022? Can they keep running?
Yes, they can. I think the question more is not just 2022, what does 2032 look like? And the reason I say a decade is you are starting to see tier one miners, BHP example, that are absolutely starting to really drive into these places. So BHP has made it very clear that nickel is going to slowly but surely over the next 10 years replace its petroleum business that it sold at the end of the last year to Woodside for $3.2 billion and some more. They believe that that is going to be the future. The deal they did with Tesla shows you that. They're also now running the rulers over all of their current tenements to start finding new additions to their portfolio in that space. So batteries are clearly going to be a future. They are clearly going to be part of the energy mix and part of the storage mix for the future. And therefore, those commodities you highlighted, lithium, nickel, it's not just that, rare earths, all those kind of players, cobalt, they are going to be the future metals. So 2022 and beyond is going to be very, very interesting for that space. And I believe it will run and continue to run.
Another interesting one is copper, and I want to talk about gold companies here, but often they go hand in hand. And I know Newcrest and Northern Star, a couple of the big gold miners, have certainly made big plays more towards the copper side of things. How do you see copper and then more generally gold companies playing out?
Copper is the Dr. Copper, as they call it. And the reason for that is because it is an absolute gauge of the health of the economy. And we know business is expanding. We know globally business is expanding. The risk that businesses want to take, but also the diving into new world orders that require copper for almost everything is there. So again, looking at your really upper end of town across the States, across UK and here in Australia, those big mining companies, they are absolutely driving front and center that copper is not just a 2022 story. It is, again, like the others, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decade story. Your Escondidas, your Olatogos, all these kinds of tier one mines that are now online are only going to get bigger because the demand for copper and its beautiful transductive material is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So copper is going to be that gauge. It's, don't be surprised to start seeing it back towards $10,000 a ton on the LME and well and truly into $6 to $7 a pound over in Chicago. It's that kind of levels over the next several years that copper will be, because it is going to be, like the others, a future metal that we all need.
And just quickly, oil. What's the outlook for that? We all care somewhat about that because most of us still have internal combustion engines.
So short term, oil will probably start to return to normal levels. It's been an interesting watch at the end of last year to see how shortages came about, the COVID revival and what it meant for shortages. That will dissipate out this year. So I think you'll start to see oil normalize, petrol prices coming back towards more like 130 to 150 rather than being 150 to even as high as $2 in some parts of the country. I also think longer term, though, that you are showing signs that oil knows that in the next 2 decades, it will no longer be the number one energy outlet for the globe. That is clear. So it's about how they continue to extract value as it does go from being a traditional fuel to a legacy fuel to probably being a dormant fuel over the next sort of 30 years. And that I think will be, what we start to hear in 2022 is more and more companies. You look at Shell, you look at BP, you look at ExxonMobil, they are fully aware that they are at the declining stage of their product and they're trying to diversify themselves.
Evan, thank you for talking to Fast 5.
Thank you, Sean.
That was Evan Lucas, Head of Strategy at InvestSMART. Michael, great advice there. Battery metals companies look pretty good.
Yep, sounds good. And Dr. Copper, I think that's my new favourite term. I'll be using that one many, many times this year. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
And as always, you should get professional advice before making any investment decisions. That's it for today. Make sure you've hit follow on the podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was the Fast 5 by Fear and Greed.